When we are raised in the first 20 years or 10 years of our life, right? We don't choose our parents, right? That's the one thing we cannot choose. We cannot choose the household that we were born to, but everything else apart from that is a choice that we can make once we can walk, talk, and we're able to sort of feed ourselves, right? In just being able to use our hands and legs for supporting ourselves. I'm not even talking about finances right now. So learning is the same as watering a plant or bringing up a child. You water it too much, it seeps out. I think management consulting firms throw too much learning at you. It's safe to say, too much learning, it seeps out. Nothing is ever retained. Everything that can be counted doesn't necessarily hold value, and everything that holds value cannot necessarily be counted. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge is always a good thing.
Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, Tanya. Welcome to the GLIT podcast. How have you been, Tanya, and how is it today?
Very well, Tosin. How are you? It's so nice to connect again after Dubai. And what a wonderful way to do that by having a dialogue. I think last time also we were both on the stage having a dialogue, and it was quite immersive. So I'm
Yeah.
quite looking forward to what we create today.
Yes, beautiful. And where are you talking from today, Tanya?
I'm based in Goa in India. It's quite sunny and bright here. It's a beach town, so internet is not as benevolent as in different parts of the world where there's more stability. But can't complain because you could walk out and see the sunset by the beach anytime you wanted.
What's the temperature now? Is this now where we begin to have this monsoon, or it's not yet?
Not yet. It's spring, summer right now, so 33 degrees is the maximum that it gets in the day. Evenings are slightly pleasant and windy. I think we'll hit monsoon in about 4 months from now.
Perfect. So that means you've got some good sunlight, and that means you can go out, have some fun.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, and you have been having a very busy period. How have you been coping, managing yourself, managing your team in this period?
So it's interesting the way I work. I actually have indirect teams to manage, specifically with my role with the Hult Prize and a university that I run, in which we are 6 people. One young person is completely attached to me, and he's the one who builds our product. And the other part is, of course, I mentor 2 or 3 teams every year to get them into the Hult Prize finals. With my organization, it's a very interesting team mix up. There is a gentleman who's a veteran journalist in foreign affairs. He's actually quite accomplished, who I have to manage sometimes, mostly because while he's more senior to me by age, from a skill perspective, I manage the P&L and the representation for the country India to the bosses in America, where the corporate office is. And then we have a younger person who's also a writer, who's from Carnegie, who then reports to the practice head, but then it all sort of rolls down to me for coordination between both teams and how we handle our clients. So it's quite an interesting mix from really young people to really old people to multicultural, bosses and teams, etc. So it's been quite a ride.
Beautiful. Okay, good day, everyone. Welcome to the GLIT podcast. And my guest today is Tanya Singh. Tanya is currently the Director of Corporate Advisory and Consulting for the Eurasia Group. She sits in Goa, India, and works across multiple time zones. She has a very enviable and robust background. She used to work at KPMG as a transformation and engagement strategy leader. She also used to work in the chief of the Reliance Technologies office. That's the CEO, chairman of Reliance Technologies. By the way, the owner of Reliance Technologies is the richest man in India and one of the richest men in the world. So that's a very niche responsibility that she was there as the chief of staff in the president's office. Also, she worked at Invest India, which is Office of the Prime Minister, handling investments and advisory for the Americas and Latin America and North America. And she also worked in a couple of startups like Zomato, Freshworks, and Cars24. And she also is the partner of the 30 Minutes University. She's a co-founder of 30 Minutes University. And also she is the Asia judge, coaching students and participants into finalists of the Hult Prize Foundation. Such a very, very robust and rich career she's had. And we are fortunate to have Tanya Singh talking with us on leadership and her perspectives on what leadership should be and how you should manage your team. Thank you once more, Tanya, for coming into the GLIT podcast, and we are looking forward to an exciting conversation.
Thank you so much, Tosin. There were so many alsos to my introduction. I feel like I need an abridged version now, but thanks for trying to do justice and thanks for your kind words. And I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Tanya. So tell me, first of all, how did you get to cross over from being a tech person? You have an engineering background. How did you land into advisory, strategy, and sales? Do you want to tell us that story quickly?
Yeah. So to be honest, while it looks quite random and accidental or maybe lucky, one of the things that I learned very, very early in my career is how to sell and how to negotiate, right? And anyone who's ever told me in my career, this cannot be done, I've personally taken it up as a challenge to sort of prove them wrong. So my first move from technology and business development roles to essentially coming into product management was someone saying no to me in an interview, and they said, well, we don't think you have the technical skills to be a product manager. And I quite took it personally, and I said, well, why not? Tell me what is required to be good at this job. And they didn't really give me the answer, but then I went and took that question to 3 more companies, one of which was kind enough to offer me a product management role, and then I learned on the job. Something similar happened with my move from product and program management to then coming into government affairs, policy, and investment, wherein an ex-client of mine was looking for a team member. I happened to be in town, went for an interview, learned investments at the Prime Minister's office on the job. And from there, I realized, okay, well, this opens an extremely different stream of options for me. So I thought about government affairs. I used to look at all these, young kids from Ivy League colleges writing policy notes and shaping policy, lawyers, etc. And then came the question, hey, I could do this too, because it looks like a largely common sense and communications role. And so interestingly enough, I applied to Oxford and Harvard and one more top Indian college to study, because I was thinking, I don't think I can make this switch very easily. Maybe I need more legitimacy. So, most people would take education as the way to sort of also switch careers, which is quite traditional. But while I was applying to both these colleges, I got offered the position at Reliance Industries in the CEO's office. The president was setting up a new team for policy. And he spoke to me about things in the interview not related to policy at all, just evaluated my attitude, and he was like, okay, I can work with this girl and let's take her in. And interestingly, during that year, while I had a job without having an education in policy, I got offered an honorary admission from Oxford to study policy. So it's quite interesting how it happened. I would call them accidents. I would call them lucky breaks. I would just call them asking the right questions. But it's just been going into a room and asking, I want this. And if there's been a no, really sitting down and understanding why it's a no. Is the bias related to my skill sets? Is the bias related to the hiring manager? Is the bias related to industry? Where is the bias? And I've sort of worked my way through that mostly.
Beautiful. And that's amazing. I like the fact that when they tell you no, you say, okay, no, thank you, but you're going to find a way to get a yes. And that's a target. And basically, how do we apply? I think it's a very, very good way to start, because as a leader, now looking back, how can we apply this ability to say no to what the general opinion is and chart a course to define what you actually want for yourself, especially knowing that sometimes when you are told it's a no, you mentioned that when you are told it's a no, is it a problem with my experience? Is it a bias with the hiring manager? Or is it a no because I simply cannot do it and I need to grow? So, and this could be one of many, many reasons why people are told a no. So what is the best way to, I think you need to double click further on those three keys where you said, what is actually the problem? Because sometimes the no is actually valid.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't let it define us. So how do we know whether the no is valid or whether the no is circumstantial or the no is just somebody being who he wants to be? And how do we now convert that into drive?
Interestingly enough, I think we as human beings, and I can safely say that, we assess ourselves very poorly. And it is not an age thing, it's not a culture thing.
Mm.
We don't sit down with ourselves often and ask ourselves enough questions, or depending on our limited and unlimited circumstances as to where we grew up, what were the kind of people we were surrounding ourselves with when our cognitive functions were being developed, we sort of become one track with our skill sets, mostly because that's something that we've done for way too long. That is the primary part of assessing where we are and what we want to do. Now, if you've not had this conversation before going into a room with a recruiter that already also comes with his or her own set of pattern recognition for that particular role, let's say you meet a recruiter who's been hiring for technology and coders for about 20 years. Now, this person has a good hold or handle already on what are they looking for in terms of answers or skill sets, or what are they reading into the CV, what are they reading into a conversation with you, and we go into that conversation completely unprepared, right? And as interviewees, always, we also are not taught that we have the right to ask questions. Typically, in an interview, you'd save yourself the last 5 minutes to ask any kind of questions, interestingly enough. And that's a practice that I notice in a lot of the recruitment rooms, right? So, the manager who's recruiting will tell you the requirements, they will understand from you what you've done, and then they will leave you about 10 minutes for question and answer. So those questions, that 10 minutes that you get for Q&A is where your play in that conversation comes in traditionally. Wherein it's, and you could actually leverage that spot at the start of the conversation as well, and completely have control over where this conversation goes, which again, no one teaches us, right? So first part is solved, asking questions to yourself. Where do I think my strengths are? Where do I think my weaknesses are? Why am I going into this room? Number two is assessing or using the 10 minutes of question and answer that you'll have in any conversation, bringing it to the front, starting with your questions so that you are in control of the conversation and you are also an equal in that conversation rather than someone who is coming and seeking something, which I think relaxes the recruiter as well and opens them up. It could go either ways, by the way, but it relaxes them and opens them up to to multiple possibilities that they themselves may not have thought of. But again, you have to read the room to get to that point. The third is, of course, I think natural curiosity. Again, we are sometimes, jobs can be a means to an end for most of us. How many of us have jobs that are truly, close to our passion or to our skill sets? Especially as freshers, when we join the industry, most of us don't have an idea of what it is that we want to do, right? And so recruiters will select you as trainees. They will mold you as to whatever is the direction that they know they want to mold you. And we'll probably, sort of stitch this in with leadership later in the story. But they usually have a sense of direction of where they want to take you, and which is also where I think we waste about 10 years or so, 5 to 10 years easily, in just being in the industry, holding a job and getting nurtured, while our schools and colleges have already spent that much time nurturing us and developing some of our strengths and weaknesses. So technically we don't need another set of trainings to sort of receive as we go into the industry. By 18 we should have a good hold on what is it that really excites us, and that is where the gaps occur, I think. And those are the gaps that I've managed to leverage by not letting a no completely, I would say, blur my view of what is being communicated in the room.
Beautiful. So I love that. So, which means that you already are at peace with who you are. You already have discovered yourself and you have taken charge of yourself. And you are able to say, this is who I think I am. And of course, I believe you believe in yourself and you're not waiting for the approval of other people to be able to decide where you want to be or who you want to be. Awesome. Awesome. So where do you now, how do we, and now when we've discovered ourselves, how do we use this to aspire and become better people in the workplace or on the job? How do we leverage this self-discovery to help ourselves become better? And as leaders, how do we help younger people leverage and discover themselves? Because like you said, many people are formed by the ecosystem or by the industry, either by the first job you've gotten. So even if you studied chemistry and you got a job in finance, if it pays the bills, if you understand what you're being taught, then you become a finance expert. Even if you studied languages and you'll end up in a tech company and engineering, and you now handle dams and you handle construction, that is your career technically. Very few people are able to break out of the mold and say, no, this is what I want to be. So what recommendation or guidance do you have for people? First of all, how is the best way to discover themselves? And if they are already in a particular track, which may not necessarily be who they are or what they want to be, what is the best path to realignment?
There's a very simple answer to the second part of your question. It's a practiced answer, and it's got to do more with practicality than with anything else. So I would say work till you accumulate enough money for you to have a choice. In case traditional methods of asking questions and shifting industry based on not your own fault, but let's say the system's perception is not changing despite attempts, and don't stop attempting, right? Hold that vision close to your heart and don't stop attempting to sort of get there, no matter what challenges. So the second part is more about conviction, preparing yourself financially, and then sort of getting into the right room to give yourself that pivot. The first part about discovering yourself is more of a process. We typically, and most people you'll notice, I'm going to uh, try and give again a very 3D answer to this. When we are raised in the first 20 years or 10 years of our life, right, we don't choose our parents, right? That's the one thing we cannot choose. We cannot choose the household that we were born into, but everything else apart from that is a choice that we can make once we can walk, talk, and we're able to sort of feed ourselves, right? In just being able to use our hands and legs for supporting ourselves. I'm not even talking about finances right now. So financial education is not important at this stage. There are two ways of discovery: either going inward and asking questions and allowing things to flow and your natural abilities to come out, or by putting yourself in different things which may be very contrarian to what you think you are, and then discovering how that sort of meshes with your current personality, right? So I could be a great dancer, I could be a great sales guy, but till the time I did not pick myself up and put me in a very different situation, let's say in sports, or put myself in a product management role that I was telling you about, I will not discover whether I'm able to do it or do justice to it or not, or whether myself internally appreciates that process of what that particular item has to offer to me in my personal life. So I think of it like a dance with yourself, making sure your narratives are correct, making sure you don't get highly influenced by positive or negative outcomes, but you enjoy the process of that discovery itself. I've met 60-year-olds who've completely switched their careers and, completely unrelated to the way that they've lived life. I've known people who've been married for, eons and eons and decide that they wanted to travel the world at 47. I've met people who've completely switched after, doing something for 2 decades in their career, just because they wanted to explore a new part of themselves, or there was a catalyst in their life that sort of brought them to that place. So it's a combination, or it's a dance of both of those things. And all I would like to sort of sum it up by saying is that it's good to do a check with yourself once every 2 weeks to a month to realign whether you're on the right road or not for you.
Good.
And you can ask for as many opinions, but ultimately the answer has to come from within.
Yeah, so I love that. And so, what you're telling us means that there will be experiments,
Yeah.
there will be learning, and there will be evaluations. So, how do you recommend that people stay ahead with continuous learning, adaptability, and getting to know what matters? We were having a conversation the other time about if you had to do a lot of self-learning or if the environment made it available for you. In one of the organizations where I worked, there was a lot of materials available for you to study. There was a library where you could get physical books. There was an e-library where you could lend books. There was subscription to Wall Street Journal. There was subscription to Forrester, and a whole lot of stuff. But very few people took advantage of it because people really don't like to do the hard work of learning. But of course, that doesn't mean people still don't like to learn. So where would you say the place of continuous learning and adaptability files into this journey of career? Should it be every time you want to go do something, you go learn it first before you do it? Or should you take time and run for 3-4 years, go learn something, run for 3 years, come back again, go learning? Or is it something that you need to do periodically and all the time?
It'll be different for different people based on their ambition and where they see their life going. Also, having access doesn't necessarily mean that you have intrinsic motivation to learn. For example, you could come from a very well-to-do family, be surrounded with books. Maybe your father was the mayor of, a country, but because you've had the silver spoon, you probably don't appreciate or you take for granted what was provided, right? So, learning is the same as watering a plant or bringing up a child. You water it too much, it seeps out. I think management consulting firms throw too much learning at you. If it's safe to say, too much learning, it seeps out. Nothing is ever retained. At the other spectrum, I think there is something to be said about school education, especially in our country as well. Again, too much learning, it seeps out, while it's tiered to sort of, go with each child. Special needs kids, for example, learn in a very different way. They're very detached from the world in all sorts of different advantages, but they learn faster. And so accommodating to them in a classroom can be a very, very difficult thing. And so in an organization as well. So I think everyone has to draw their own learning map. And, we're in the era of tools like ChatGPT, how your, prompt works and what it learns from a daily prompt from you versus how the tool learns from me is going to be very, very different. So I think the technology is as good as the human being. So there is no straight answer to this. Whatever piques your curiosity, whatever you feel you can hold on to, or you're still curious about and excited about after 2 to 3 years, definitely keep it going. And if you feel you need to pivot, whether it's because other people in your community are changing, the system is changing, or you feel you might, derive more value or money out of learning this particular thing, it really is about it makes you more well-rounded as a person rather than any other outcome. I think knowledge for the sake of knowledge is always a good thing.
Interesting. And should one learn consistently on the job, or you should do it in single dashes where you learn, work, or is it like you said, it's like watering a plant? Should it go consistently side by side, or what's your best recommendation?
I think for me, what's worked, and I can answer for myself, like I said, there's no one way that works for everyone, but what I've learned about myself is that I'm a bit of a think fast and slow person, meaning I will think for a week, and then I will go really fast and I will execute it. Then I will collect my findings. My brain is somewhere in between a researcher, a scientific researcher, and a mathematician. So, and then I'll collect all of this data, then I'll go reiterate the process again and see if I was better. So for me, it's either fail fast and quickly and more in terms of experiential learning. I don't learn via books at all.
Interesting. Okay, so now we've spoken about learning. How do you now deal with adaptability? Moving from one industry to another, moving from one career to another. What is your best advice for adaptability? There's a concept of the fixed and the growth mindset. There's the concept of when the facts change, you change your mind. But you have worked in a very, very diverse range of environments. So what's the best way? Do you just be you and don't care about what's going on around you? Or is there a strategy to adaptability?
No, absolutely, there is strategy. I think, well, for starters, I've been me all along, and I don't think the core has changed. But being me has more to do with value systems rather than particular skill sets or how my personality will get shaped up. From an adaptability perspective, yes, of course, the way you behave when you're a manager versus the way you behave when you're a director, it's very different connotations to how that's perceived in the world. The similar thing comes with industry. I will call myself lucky Tosin. When I was young, I trained in dramatics. So maybe the extra flair that I have is that I am able to get into character and yet be able to detach myself and look at my own performance and critique it and become better. So maybe that's a special skill I have. Not everyone would have access to it. But I do feel if you'd met me 13 years ago, I was this young, energetic person who would run and just run towards an objective without thinking about defense. Okay. If you'd met me 6 years earlier, I'd be a very poised female who was great at asking questions and solutioning with lots of different stakeholders, but was still in the mode of listening and solutioning. You meet me today, and I'm the one who directs how the business runs. So it's a very, very different positioning. It's a very, very different industry. In my industry now, today, both in management consulting and when you're talking about advisory roles, privacy and trust is what is superbly important, right? And I'm sure you would have noticed that in your industry as well, specifically when it comes to banking and financial services. Privacy and trust is at the top of everything. And so is detail orientation, right? I cannot get my analysis wrong. I cannot get my numbers wrong, right? So it really depends, again, industry to industry, how poised and how you adapt to those changes as well. Eventually in life, problems are solved either with people, by involving people, or by throwing resources at it, which is money. There is no third solution per se, or you throw an engineering design at it, right? You re engineer the whole process. In that context, I think the build up as you grow more senior and as you change industries, it nuances you towards the different kind of people, both technical, non-technical, that exist in this industry. It nuances you towards the difference between subjectivity and objectivity, and then it nuances you towards perceptions and perspectives.
Okay, cool. So there is a required strategy for adaptability per level. That's what you recommend.
Absolutely.
And
The
that
chessboard
means
changes,
that
the game changes. Yeah.
that means that regardless of what level, the strategy for adaptability is different, and you need to learn how to manage it at that time and to be
Yes.
able to deal with it with the required wisdom. And what that regardless of what happens, there would always be people. And because there will always be people, you need to be able to deal with people with the right way at each stage that you are. Correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. And in that light, where do we now put effective communication and relationship building?
So That is fundamental. So, let me start that with an example since we came from adaptability, and I'll come back to communication. If you've noticed, most CEOs, right, they're so short of time that they will prefer to communicate over a succinct text or a three-pointer email than you writing long paragraphs to them. And if you've written a long paragraph to them, the communication falls flat. Okay. So as we were talking about gradients and how you adapt through different levels of the game or of how you rise up the ladder, the same comes with communicating effectively as well. So communication largely would be context, whether it's concise, whether it's um, clear, whether you understand whether you're passing information or asking a question, or do you want to revert out of this person. So why is it that you're communicating in the first place? All of those little nuances become the foundation stone of how you appear in the world. In fact, I may be the smartest person in the room, but if I can't get up and deliver a lecture to a room full of 200 people, no one will believe that I'm a smart person. Let me give you a personal anecdote here. I used to shy away from public speaking a lot, mostly because I had this perception that the smart people who have knowledge don't tend to share their knowledge because it's not advantageous to them. But the more I see the world, the more I sort of changed my perspective over the same thing, that if someone truly has knowledge to share, they'll be absolutely comfortable in sharing them or sharing it with the world. And so for me, that perception completely helped me nuance my communication and how I appear in the world. And this is the difference between a manager and a director skip up, right? As a manager, I didn't really need to be in the public eye so much. I was the one solutioning, I was the one who was the brains behind the strategy. But today, I have to meet people, I have to appear at events, I have to make sure that my organization is positioned in a way that it's reflected in the best light. We seem professional, we're dressed to the upteenth all the time. So, all of those parts form a part of my nonverbal communication as well. So, it's not just words that I'm using wherever I'm communicating. Similarly, the way I communicate to an ambassador of a country, the way I communicate, the words I use is very, very different than the way I would communicate to my parents. Is very different from the way I communicate to my friend. Is very, very different from a colleague. Very different from a senior person who's under my advice. So all of those nuances, you can't be 100% correct all the time. You do learn as you go, but that's really what I have learned in the last 2 years of my time sort of going to the next level. I think I was pretty much at manager level since about 24 years of age to 32 in a sense. So I've spent 10 years in middle management, safe to say, from my perspective.
Okay, beautiful. So that's interesting. So I like the way you mentioned it, that the recipient of your comms is very, very important on how you communicate. And also the position in which you are when communicating is also important. So it's okay to the way you send it out and also the way in which it's received. Okay, beautiful. So communication is really critical because I mean, that's the only way I can know what's in your mind. Because if you smile at me, that's subtle communication. But again, you could smile at me and pass stern news or tough news to me. And you could frown at me and pass good news to me. So, I mean, I tell people I'm not a spirit. I don't know what's in your mind. I only deal with what I perceive or what you tell me. So communication is very, very important. Now, how do we move? I like the way you have given that insight on communication. Can we now take that into relationship building? As we grow, how do we leverage, build relationships? And as we lead, how do we handle relationships?
To the first part of your question, how do we handle relationships? While it's important to communicate a lot for a relationship to sort of prosper over time, right? Because it starts with communication. However, I think the sustenance of relationship has more to do with action orientation and your communication and your actions matching or being consistent, in my view. To the second part of your question, how it changes with leadership or with contextual leadership in the case of both internal and external stakeholders. Let me give you an example. So last year at the Hult Prize, we had a team from Taiwan. They were really senior people. Everyone was elder to me. I'm 34 now, so the average age of that group was between 35 and 40. And while they had the best idea in the room, one of the reasons that they were not crossing over a certain stage is because they didn't have the common language or finesse in English as a language, right? And the second thing was that in their head, they were trying to do so many things that for judges who probably are veterans in being specialists in their field, and the theme was fashion, it sounded very complex to their head. And no one on the judgment panel was a management consultant. Okay. So they were used to seeing products. Now, like I said, the solution was actually the best. The challenge was the ethnicity. And the second challenge was the fact that it was a complex concept that needed to be explained in a 30-second pitch really, really easily and quickly. One of the successes that I had, in fact, more than being the mentor of the team that won the $1 million grant, was this team, and it's work that I'm proud of, was from getting them to being rejected in the regional rounds to the second place in the global finals. And I'll tell you how we did it. First, we needed to help them with the struggle, or really had to spend time with them individually to understand what their business idea was, which no one in this format as a mentor really has the time for. Because we're all part of the community, you can choose from a panel of experts, right? It could be anybody's game. And not everyone will have the time to really spend with you, nurturing you to the fullest of your capacity. Some people may not even see it at that point. And everyone was a mentor in a different capacity. So we got lucky that we chose each other, but had to individually spend time with them to really understand and get to the depths of what was the idea about, how each member of the team contributed to that idea, help them eliminate some of the things that they didn't need to do for the sake of the competition to get ahead, and then help them with certain partnerships when they went to clients to get the proof of concept in place. That entire process took us 6 months, intermittently over different time zones and individually handling with them. But the result or the outcome was this team, uh, you know, placing their bet on one client, which is now, by the way, using their building material that they constructed out of waste to build the largest building in Taiwan. And this is being sponsored by Coca-Cola. They didn't win the grant, but they won business in real life. And for them, the big part in that 6 months of the transformation was just learning how to simplify concepts in their own head. Again, practicing detachment doesn't come very easily when you're very attached to the idea emotionally, and when it's your sweat and toil gone into doing something. Unfortunately, you can't see it from a detached place, which is what the breakthrough was. But it was mostly a communication breakthrough. I couldn't change their accents. I couldn't make them better at English. I couldn't do a lot of things, but I could at least help them communicate just their idea to the relevant audience in a 30-second pitch. And that was the game changer. Similarly, um, I personally have gone through this as well in my case, wherein communication of my ideas to my parents, because it's a generation gap and it's a very different way of life and work styles, it becomes very difficult. In fact, I've been at an impasse with my father. I shouldn't be saying this on a podcast, but I've been at an impasse with my father for how to co-invest financially together as a family, because we just see things very, very differently, right? We see asset classes very differently. Now, for me to have that conversation with him, I first had to get into the headspace of a banker. Then I had to get into the headspace of a gentleman who's been married for 40 years and has one child. Then I had to get into the headspace of asset classes, and that was, I had to learn through an investment banker, completely unrelated to both of us. Then I had to evaluate the market where I wanted him to co-invest in. So that entire process took me 3 years. 3 years for a very small investment of an asset class. But it had its own process because the breakthrough was not happening because we were generations apart. Even though asset classes have not changed, even though the relationship, the meaning of the relationship has not changed, I've been an adult and living outside my parents for quite some time. So it was not that we couldn't talk on an equal footing. It was just that the process took a while. So it really comes down to nuances, like I said. End of the day, we are dealing with people. People are emotional messes. People are not perfect. We are not binary. Numbers are binary. We are not. So I say this, right? In life, everything that can be counted doesn't necessarily hold value, and everything that holds value cannot necessarily be counted. So it's again a very interesting nuance about you deal with people as people, not as numbers, and you will have them, reaching out to the best of their potential. But when it comes to evaluating business conversations where outcomes are numbers related, you talk numbers. And that's where you have to separate it. I could be having, the best day of my life, the worst week of my life professionally. But at the end of the day, if I can separate the communication that I brought home to my partner, to my parents, to my team, I think that is what is going to separate me in terms of both my longevity and my effectiveness of communication largely.
Beautiful. So, how do we leverage this into driving results? You mentioned that you used to be a 24 horsepower engine, and but as you grew older, you began to get more matured. So, what are the best ways to drive results? Again, I ask from the perspective of the individual contributor or the worker who is driving results, who is trying to get the results. And then I also ask from the perspective of the leader who is trying to make his people work to get stuff done. How do we handle this and how do we balance it? So, because sometimes people will not move and you need to push. And sometimes, as much as you want to push, you don't want to be a slave driver. You don't want to be a horsewhip holder. So where is the good balance to say you help people get results and they are happy getting it? But for me, as an individual contributor, how do I also get stuff done without burning out, without burning bridges, and without causing trouble all over the place?
So I think I want to bring us back to where we started, right? Having an assessment of self. As an individual contributor, it is more about assessment of self and accountability, and then being able to say yes and no and setting the right expectations. And sometimes you have to keep setting those expectations again and again with your seniors, right? You must have conversations around that. On the flip side of it, as a leader, I'm a very laissez-faire kind of leader. I do not micromanage because I personally don't like being micromanaged. Having said that, not everyone has very high levels of accountability and motivation, right? And then there are, of course, days that the motivation goes down, accountability goes down. So it's not a perfect science. Having said that, for people who don't have very high levels of accountability, I tend to build in incentives and penalties for them within the system, right? So let's say I know there's a person who's very driven by their ego, and that is my subordinate. I will ensure that I allow him his freedom of creativity, but I put in an A player who's at par at him so that he does not, relax himself to meet the average level. In my view, there are typically four types of people in an organization. So if this is the capability matrix and this is the effort matrix, or your x-axis is capability and this is effort, you will see that most people will fall into one of the four quadrants. Now, your low effort, low capability person is not someone you want to have in a team, and it's also technically most people in the world, right? They want maximum results with the least effort. These people can be really smart as entrepreneurs, by the way. So there is a way of cultivating their talent as well. Yeah, so the second quadrant that you have, so let me take the best quadrant, now the opposite quadrant, which is high effort, high accountability, high credibility, and high skill. This person is your A player, and largely the A player will bring up the average, worth or value of how the team performs anyway. So you want to have more A players in a room because they drive everything, but too many A players in a room and nothing will get done, right? So that's where you have to balance both the extreme quadrants. And then you want to keep around the person with high accountability and high effort, less skill, as the person who you can trust blindly with your office keys, your checkbooks, etc. But this person, unfortunately, cannot be taught the skill. And that's where, to balance it out, comes your high skill, low credibility, or low effort person. This person will be the troublemaker in your team because his skill is largely high, the effort that he puts in is low. So you want to be kind of making sure that you have your ducks in a row with the different sets of people that you will have in a team. And with each person, you must not reprimand publicly, you must appreciate publicly, you must, however, decentivize in a personal space. So there are checks and balances to be kept in general. And I think for me, I try to hire A players. And then the second kind of people I look for, as long as they are credible and are making a consistent effort, I am okay if their skill level is not very high, because then these are the kind of people who keep the team together on the days that the morale is low, because they're invested in it for the people, not so much because they have a point to prove.
Lovely. I never have had this kind of mindset. This is a new, I'll call it the Tanya model. And yes, I've done a lot of people, I've thought a lot of this, but I really never, I know this, but I've never really been able to dimension it into these buckets. And truly, I mean, some are the defenders, some are, you want them to take care of the house, and some you want to go with to war with. And some you just don't want to have them in the room at all. You don't even want them to teach you. That's really interesting. I think that's a beautiful one. That's a really beautiful one. Thank you, Tanya. I couldn't ask for more. So invariably, we are saying that the credibility and effort or capability is important, but also we need to ensure that we have it in the right proportions. And now, how do we help when we have this kind of good people in our teams? What is the best approach for motivation and inspiration?
May I ask you to repeat that again, the last
What is
part?
the best approach for motivation and inspiration to get them to get the results? So they are
I
driven,
think
we have already pocketized them, but how do we now make sure that the momentum doesn't drop and we win?
I think inspired action, but it's not always, you can't be on and always be the one in the room to do inspired action. We're all human at the end of the day. So I try to, like I said, one is what can I do is definitely inspired by action. That's the motivation I can give. What else can I do as a leader? I can provide resources. I can create a safe space for people to come in and perform their best and not feel threatened or not feel not cared for. I think those are the human elements that one plays on. And then from a motivation perspective, I always try to connect with people on an intrinsic motivation level. So everyone has something in common. Something. The fact that we're all Homo sapiens is what we have in common, even if we don't share the same, likes and dislikes for sports, for people, for personalities, for what we want to study, pursue in our careers, etc., and how we look at relationships, right? So there's always something in common for you to connect with a person and become their friend, or place that position of trust. So with that, if that's a relationship that you can crack with people in your team, at the end of the day, it's going to be so easy to keep them motivated. Let me give you a small example. And this is maybe a example that hits upon some biases and also hits upon some change towards the outcome. So my South Asia practice head, the first time we had a team meeting, I went in and there was a young guy who is an aerospace and defense specialist, and I come from technology and I'm a woman. So he got him a book on aerospace and defense and got me a book on love. I was so offended. The first time I met this gentleman, I was highly offended and I was like, why would you assume that I'm looking for love and I would enjoy reading a story about women and what they seek in love in today's age? Maybe I have love and I'm not seeking it, and there is nothing of value that I will derive from this book. So the next time, to amend his strategy, he got me a sari. Again, he got the wrong sari. And I reprimanded him for it. This is a person who's in my team who's obviously senior to me. So I see him like almost like a really senior person that I have enough to gain from. But I don't report into him. So it's a very interesting relationship. So the next time he got me a sari and I got offended again because the sari was translucent. I'm someone who wears, very opaque things. I don't want the attention to be shifting to my body or to my beauty when I'm in a room full of people talking business. And the third time, he finally gave up and he said, "Why don't you tell me what you want?" So I gave him a list of books that I'm reading. And I told him that, I write as well. And so the next time he comes to me, he should come to me with a business opportunity where I can make money. And then I gave him the list of books that I wanted, one of which was Presidents of War, which had nothing to do with my ladylike self at all. And so eventually we both learned that we had so many biases, playing into that conversation, that he had no idea of my intrinsic motivations. And this is Eurasia. This is as soon as Eurasia Group. Both my bosses have no idea about my roles and my skill sets. They just, met a person on a 30-minute conversation who can speak well, looks good, seems to handle clients, gave great answers about how she handled difficult situations, and that was the end of it. So I feel like in a process of discovery, my own bosses are still in the process of understanding who they've hired. So it happens all the time. But in my way of me, meeting with my team, I would give the person what they want and I ask a lot of questions, even though it's not in my position tactfully to ask those questions.
So you are saying that you ask them what they need to succeed.
Yes, what will bring their best self to work? Absolutely. What can I do for them? What can I enable for them? Can I take them out and expose them to a part of the world that only I have access to? Then I would by all means do it.
Good. So I'm going to try to recap this kind of model. So you don't like to micromanage. You also don't like being micromanaged. So you are deliberate about the kind of people you hire,
Yes.
so that they can self-sustain. And then rather than you being the school prefect or the mother hen, calling children home to roost, ringing the bell for lunch or doing all that, you like them to let you know what they need to be empowered, and like them to let you know what they need to succeed. You give them the best within your capability, and then you set them off to succeed right on their own with minimal interruption.
Yeah.
And maximum contribution.
Yes. Maximum support and cheering. Yes, absolutely.
Good. Okay. So I think the recommendation, learning point from here is that as much as possible, don't just hire anybody on your team. And this is why we see a lot of leaders taking people along with them whenever they move. So don't just hire anybody on your team. Let people have the capacity to deal according to their strengths, because if they didn't have those strengths, they probably would not be on your team. And of course, encouraging your people to succeed by letting them tell you how they plan to succeed, what they need to succeed, and what they want you to support them with. And then I think it's not the whole solution, but I think it's a viable solution that will always work. Thank you, Tanya. That's beautiful. So I like the way you have praised this, and this is really, really wonderful. Now, one question which is unscripted that I would ask is, now you're a lady in a senior position, which we are beginning to see many more of today. I am an advocate of women leaders, but what recommendation will you have for the ladies who are coming behind? How would you recommend that they deal? What would you recommend that they do? What do you think they should take up? And what's the best recommendation for them, in your own opinion?
You know, it's interesting that we framed the question in that way. We as a world are not aware that some of the inventions that we take for granted actually came from women in general. So I think ladies were always in front. It's just that they were marked clearly, earmarked for roles which involve nurturing and raising beautiful children and households, etc., which I think is still a strength. But bring that lady to an executive room, and the paradigm completely changes, right? Because you have a more gentler, softer, more holistic, more multitasked way of looking at things, which probably was not is not available or was not available if you switch the genders, not because men lack particularly multitasking abilities, but just how the generations have been raised, or the genders have been raised across time from a role perspective. I I would say that it is definitely on a practical aspect. Maybe 20 years ago, it would have been very, very difficult, so to speak, in what we hear from pop culture, for a woman to do justice to both the home and the workplace. However, if we scoot back in civilization, hunters and gatherers have had women, in similar roles as men from a civilization perspective. I know in African women, for example, I don't think there's ever been this question of women empowerment within the tribes, I'm sure, or within the local people. It's just that the West world probably looks at it at women from Africa need to be empowered, or from India need to be empowered. So, on a macro perspective, I think women have had these roles regardless of their gender. It's just that they need to be protected when they're giving birth to a child, because unfortunately they're vulnerable during those 9 months. I think that's where ecosystems have always been created. My mother, for example, comes from an institution wherein I grew up, and there were childcare facilities where she was working. I personally have been in an institution wherein you had paternity leaves along with maternity leaves about 6 years ago. This was a Google sponsored company or startup that made it to the NASDAQ as the first Indian company about 7 years ago. So I've never really looked at the world in terms of women and men. In fact, I was playing more with the boys than I had female friends. Like, no one really got me a doll, no one asked me to come in the kitchen and make tea for your parents. No one asked me all those things. I was just let out to play. And so I came into tech because my five friends were all in the FANG companies when I was 20. And so where else could you be except where your friends are? So it was those easy decisions that I had to make. I just think for people at large, men or women, first of all, what I notice as part of the post feminism era is that women have become more masculine than they need to be, even though the strength lies in the woman being a woman, right? And that's the whole beauty of how a woman would solve a problem versus a man would, or how different people would. Now I'll take it beyond gender. And the other thing that I've seen is that there is this ambitiousness to take over both the household and the boardroom. I think it's a little extreme. Like I said, I feel it was never a bias, at least that I had to hit in my career, personally speaking. But that may be because of my mindset, that may be because I was born in the right era. A lot of people in my country, would complain about gender parity, etc. But I've never really had a challenge with demanding the money that I want, rather than looking at what was a man in my industry getting paid, etc. So I've really never focused on the negatives for me to be able to be the best spokesperson for women here. But I can tell you this, that I appreciate the sensitivity and the fact that they can multitask, and the gentleness and the listening capabilities and the empathy that women bring to any situation. I appreciate that a lot, and I think the yin and yang has to be balanced both at home and corporate boardrooms. So I've never really had a challenge in doing that, and neither should would I profess to any young lady that she should even think like that, or her starting point of when she assesses her skills and place in the world should be a gender question at all.
Good, good. So a school of thought says ladies are equal to men. A school of thought says what a man can do, a woman can do better. A school of thought says women should earn exactly the same as men. I don't have a problem with all of that. And I'm happy that you also feel the same. Of course, emotional requirements, approach to issues, reasoning approach or perspectives or methods may vary. But I concur with you that ladies have equal rights and equal capabilities like men. And of course, because of the facts of the way they are made, they are able to see more things in different perspectives than men, if given the opportunities.
Yeah, but Tosin, one macro thing that I want to sort of bring in here to our last point is that while all of this is true, every human technically should be treated as equal as the society that we want to build. Unfortunately, resources and opportunities are not distributed equally. Now, one may go back in time and start questioning it, but rather than focusing on all of that noise, isn't it just easy to just compare ourselves to us? And as long as we are progressing on an individual level, trust that society will progress as well as accumulated. Right? It's if every person in a job did their job to the best of their abilities, as with integrity and with authenticity, then the entire organization or the pie will expand, right? So I think people worry too much about comparison and about these macro concepts. Life runs in micros. So just do better than what you did yesterday for the sake of you, and everything else shall align. It's not a
So
competition.
your competition is the person in the mirror.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's the best. I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay, so thank you so much, Tanya. This has been a wonderful 1 hour. But before we leave, we typically have a surprise challenge for
Okay.
our guests. The previous guest will typically leave a question, and I don't think you would have a problem with this question. And the response is that you tell us what your perspective is on that question, and then you leave a challenge for the next guest.
Okay. So it's a question that I have to leave for the next guest.
You
Right?
have to leave a question for the next guest, but you also need to answer the question dropped by the last guest.
Okay. Okay.
And the last question that I recall having was to how to respond with competence. Being a lady, the last guest said, whenever she's told to do something, the first thing that comes to her mind is the 1,000 ways why it would go wrong and the 1,000 reasons why she cannot do it. And she's learning to now say, no, that's not the best way. So how can I come to say, let's go, and then I get it done, rather than first of all saying no, and then giving you a litany of reasons why I cannot do it, and then I go to bed, then I come back to agree, and then I may have lost the opportunity. So what's your perspective towards that?
So if she's struggling with that at this point, I think the easiest thing to say to her was the world belongs to people who do and not those who think necessarily. You could think all you want, but till the time you go execute it, you'll never know. You will have no way of knowing. Um, how to respond with competence? This is again a subjective one, right? So, I mean, depends whose competence are we speaking about, our own or the listener?
My own.
Okay.
Your own.
Yeah. So there is no real way of assessing competence by looking at a person's job roles, tasks, etc. You could get a fair sense, but then there is so much unknown. I think the way to approach these kind of situations is super easy. Just always be confident in the fact that, and humble at the same time. So be confident in putting your point across and without creating doubt in the listener's mind. Let's say that you're an expert in finance and I'm an expert in technology. However, I may not be an expert in hardware. I may just be an expert in software, but you don't know that. I know that, right? So the other person may not understand the depth of my competence as well. So the way to handle communicating something would be that I would tell you my view or my opinion or a fact based communication as to whatever you've asked me. And then I would position it as, I would suffix a question after that, either in terms of asking, did that answer your question? Or by saying something like, this is what I gauged from your question. If you're looking for more details, I'm happy to add to the best of my capability. And that shows your humility, that shows your curiosity, that sort of puts the other person at ease as well and sort of, builds you into that conversation. Works.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So what challenge would you leave for the next person?
Is it a woman or a man that you're speaking to?
We choose to be gender agnostic here.
Okay. I wanted to leave a trivia question. But since this is the nature of my business nowadays, I'm going to be putting a question that allows the room to think.
That's fine.
The question is why or why not? Or let me rephrase it. What do you think is the role of geography in global geopolitics?
The role of geography.
Yes.
Do you want to double click a little bit?
Yes. So geopolitics is politics around land, correct? It's on borders basically, right? That's the dictionary definition of geopolitics. So it's politics defined by geography. Technically, that's the term. But I want the person on the next episode to really, as something that you'll ask them at the end of the podcast, and I'm assuming it's not their core area, just think about whether they think of geopolitics in terms of geography and how far does geography define the politics of the world, or they come up with a very different answer. Maybe they talk about data in politics, maybe they say it has no role. I'll be curious to listen to what comes out as an answer.
Okay, cool, beautiful. I'd let you know what that comes up with. And I'm happy that you've been able to tell us that the world belongs to doers. So if you wonder whether you can do it or not, then you're not going to become a champion. So it is the doers who win. And so respond with competence and ensure that you are able to do it with confidence and humility. Thank you so much, Tanya. It's been wonderful hanging out with Tanya Singh, and it's been an exciting period. We've learned a lot of leadership. We've developed the competency, capabilities / efficiency matrix. According to Tanya, that is the Tanya model for hiring people and leading people. And we also have learned a lot about communication and gender equality, a whole lot to talk about. And Tanya has been one of the most amazing guests. It's been wonderful hanging out with you, Tanya. And I believe that we will have you back on the podcast very soon to share your thoughts on many, many, many other things that you know. People like you are rare, and it's really wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much, Tanya. And everyone, thank you also for joining the GLIT podcast. We are available on YouTube, on Spotify, and you can easily listen to us or watch us, and also share your thoughts or comments wherever you are watching us. Thank you once again. I'm your host, Tosin, and I'm looking forward to reading and hearing from you. Any last words, Tanya?
Thank you, Tosin, and I look forward to seeing you and hosting you in Goa soon.
No problem. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Pleasure.